The kingdom of my divine will in the midst of creatures. Book of Heaven, Volume 31, Part 6. November 13th, 1932. Industries and Traffics of Jesus in the Sacrament. What forms his paradise and what forms his purgatory? I was feeling all sunken in my nothingness, and feeling without my most sweet Jesus, I felt my nothingness emptied of its life, without support and without strength. And since I had received Holy Communion, I felt that I had nothing to offer to Jesus, and I felt oppressed and embittered. And he, compassionating me, told me, "My daughter, courage! Your nothingness with your Jesus is everything, and you can give me everything. In fact, you must know that when you receive me in the sacrament, I do not descend alone, but I descend with all my works. And just as I make you the owner of my sacramental life, so do I make you the owner of all my works. Therefore, if you want, you have much to give me, because you have my works in your power. More so, since my sacramental life, which you receive in the Holy Host, is surrounded by the acts that my humanity did for me when I received myself in instituting the Most Holy Sacrament. It is surrounded by the acts that my celestial Mamma did for me when she received me in the sacrament. It is surrounded by all the acts of those who live of my will, because these acts are inseparable from me and remain incorporated with me as part of my own life. So, you can give me everything, because they serve to cover your misery, to make up for your love, almost so as not to make you feel ashamed that as I come into you, you would have nothing to give me. Even more, as you make use of them in order to give them to me, and be able to please me and love me by means of these acts, they bilocate and become your acts and my acts, acts of the Sovereign Queen, and acts of the souls who live of my will, in such a way that, instead of having one, I have two, and my sacramental life remains surrounded by double acts, by double love, by greater glory. These are my traffics that I do when I communicate myself to souls. I give of my own in order to get twice as much from them, and so I industriate myself to put into traffic my very sacramental life, so as to receive the requital of it. But alas, how many do not make use of it, and they remain as having nothing, nor do they know what to give me. And I remain without a new cortege, starved of their acts, and with the sorrow of not even being able to industriate myself in my loving traffics. You shall not do this to me, because if I come, it is not just to come, but also because I want to give myself and receive as much as the creature can give. This forms my satisfaction, my contentment, and my paradise in the most holy sacrament. To give myself and receive nothing from them forms my purgatory in my little prison of the sacramental host. a purgatory that human ingratitude forms for me. Therefore, be attentive, and with courage, and without any reservation. Give me from my own, and all of yourself to me, that I may be able to say, I gave everything to her, and she gave everything to me. In this way, you will form my contentment and my traffic of love. After this, I was praying my round in the acts of the divine will, and it seemed to me that all created things were inviting me, one after the other, so as to make themselves known as works of the omnipotent Fiat, in which it awaited my little requital of love. And though little, it wanted it, it demanded it, in order to obtain its purpose, for having issued the whole creation. And while I was trying to follow the divine will, my lovable Jesus, repeating his short little visit, told me, Blessed daughter of mine, everything that our paternal goodness operated in creation and redemption has not yet received the requital of the creature. And the reason is because our purpose, for which creation was created, was that man would fulfill our will in everything. That same will, operating in creation, was to obtain its continuous operating act in the creature, in such a way that the echo of one was to form the same echo in the other, so as to make them one. But my operating virtue of my will remains alone, with all its magnificence, power, wisdom, and beauty. It remains in the celestial spheres, but in man it is repressed. And because he does not have my will operating in him, he has no sense of hearing to listen to the echo of its operative virtue in creation. Therefore, not having obtained the purpose, our works are without requital. The purpose forms the requital of any work, little or great, that one may do. And you must be convinced that no one, both in the divine order and in the human, operates without a purpose and to obtain its requital. The purpose can be called the beginning and the life of a work, the requital, the completion. Oh, how many works would have no beginning if there were no purpose, and would be left half done if the certainty of the requital were not there. The requital makes one bear unheard of sacrifices, and gives excessive heroism to God and to creatures. Now, if my divine will does not form its kingdom in souls, and they do not give it the freedom to dominate them with its creative and operative virtue, a true requital shall not be given to us, and therefore we shall always be in waiting, and will see our most beautiful works as though by half, and without the fulfillment of our purpose. So the most beautiful thing, the most important act, is missing, as the purpose for which all things were created is missing. See then how necessary it is for the kingdom of my divine will to come. More so, since not having received the true requital, our creative work has remained as though suspended, and has not been able to proceed forward in the work of creation. In fact, it is established that from the external creation that they possess, there is a footnote here in reference to the word they as referring to creatures. We'll begin at the sentence again. In fact, it is established that from the external creation that creatures possess was to proceed the internal creation in the depth of souls. And this could be done if my will had the first place, the freedom to operate in the human will. But not having it, it cannot go forward in its creative work. It remains hampered, unable to create in her the new heavens, stars, suns, and so forth, to requite itself for those it gave to her in the creation of all things. And not being able to go forward in our works, not being able to continue what we have established to do in the creatures by virtue of our will, how can we requite ourselves if we have not yet finished doing what we want, and have not fulfilled the work of creation that was started many centuries ago? In fact, the work of creation must comprise altogether what my fiat was to do in all creatures, to be able to be called a fulfilled work of ours. And if our volition has not yet done everything it wants to do, how can it say that I have accomplished my work, let alone requite itself for everything it has done? So, when we obtain the purpose that the creature do our will in everything, and live in it, and when she has as her purpose that of living of our will, and of letting it reign, so as to give the field to the magnificence of its works, then, once the purpose of one is the purpose of the other, only then shall we be able to receive the true requital of everything we have done for love of creatures. Therefore be attentive, and always forward in my will. Fiat. November 20th, 1932. God placed happiness in his works to render the creature happy. Each act done in the divine will is a work, a step, a love that God gives to the creature. I am always back to the start in going around in the acts of the divine will. And while I seem to have gone around within its works, and comprehended all the beauty, the sanctity, the infinite goods that they contain, in going around again, I feel I am illiterate, a little ignorant one, and I see that there is still much left to comprehend, and to take, and to learn from the works of the Supreme Will. But while my little intelligence remained as though enraptured in looking at the magnificence of its works, my celestial King, Jesus, visiting my poor soul, told me, "Blessed daughter of mine, all my works contain infinite value and goods. This is why, while it seems to you that you have comprehended everything, as you return again into the midst of our works, you find that very much is left to you to comprehend. And this happens because the infinite cannot be enclosed in the finite. At the most it can be filled, but as for enclosing the whole of the infinite, it shall be impossible for it. And since your intelligence is finite, it exhausts before the infinite, it gets filled, and seems to have comprehended everything. But it is not true. It is rather that having filled itself, it has no place where to put other divine cognitions. But then, by masticating them and thinking them over, it forms the new little place in its intelligence, and finding itself again in the midst of our works, it finds new things to take and to learn. Here, then, the reason why you always feel illiterate every time you find yourself before the magnificence of our divine works. You must know that both in the works of creation and in those of redemption, we placed in each of them the fullness of happiness, of light, of grace, of goodness, and so forth, of all the divine qualities. And all these prerogatives, in act of pouring themselves upon the creature, to render her happy. The happiness of our works, like celestial air, carries the fragrance, the divine embalming, to whomever draws near them to comprehend them, and overflowing out of themselves, they communicate the infinite goods that they possess. By means of our works, we placed the creatures under the reign of our happiness, to render them happy. But because they do not draw near in order to comprehend them, they are unhappy and feel the poisonous air of their human will. No one operates with the purpose of becoming unhappy, or of being bearer of unhappiness, and of not drawing the profit, the good, of one's work. Much less so does the Supreme Being, who did everything in order to form the staircase of happiness for the creature. Now, our only contentment is to see the creature in the midst of our works, to unify herself with them, enjoy them, and comprehend them, and to form for herself the norm of how she must operate in her works. And since our will knows not how to do dissimilar works, it repeats in the creature the facsimile of our works. After this, I continue to feel all immersed in the divine will, and my lovable Jesus added, "My daughter, do not be surprised. Everything is possible in my will. With it, the creature holds everything in her power, and can do anything. Even more, she feels its empire over her being, and not one act comes out of her if it is not invested by a divine act, power, and strength. What is human dies in our will, but happy and glorious death. It dies in order to rise again with the life of the acts of a divine power and of a will that is not its own. And the empire she feels over herself is so great that if it were given to her to do other things of her own will, even holy and good, she would never do them. She would content herself with remaining without doing anything, even for centuries, rather than doing a single act upon which she does not feel the empire of the operating act of my will. In fact, in it, the creature comprehends with clarity what even just one act of my will operating in her act means, such that compared to 1,000 acts of hers without the divine act, these would be almost nothing. You must know that, as the creature enters into our will, our goodness is so great, and we delight so much in keeping her with us, that we give her our works, our steps, our love, as much as it is possible for a creature. So each time she does an act in the divine will, she acquires now one step of ours, now one work. Now she takes our love, our goodness, in her power, and all happy she says to us, "In your will I have your love in my power, therefore I can love you very much. My love is not dissimilar to yours, therefore I can love you as much as you love yourselves. I have your works in my power to glorify you, and your steps in mine, to tread the same way that you tread, in search of all creatures, to lead them all before your adorable majesty. And since our Supreme Being, with its immensity, is present everywhere, and therefore is life of each work, and step of each foot, and heartbeat of each heart, having given to her from our own, we feel the creature who lives in our will, walking together with us in the steps of all, in the works of each one. And she loves us in the beating of each heart. And when she sees that the creatures offend us, as our faithful one, she would want to hide us within her littleness, and lay down her life, which is also ours, for our defense. Oh, how not to love this creature! In our will there are unheard of prodigies, and since it is not known, it is no wonder that they do not believe in what I tell you. But you, do not stop. Follow its light, and let yourself be its happy prey. Fiat. November 27th, 1932. The human will is like paper on which the divine image is coined, and God places on it the value of the number that he wants. Example: God enclosed in the act of the creature. I am always prey to the divine fiat. My littleness does not tire of wandering around it and within it, with the sure hope of being consumed in its light, and with the appetite of penetrating ever more into its knowledges, to be able to savor new divine tastes. In fact, each additional knowledge is one more taste that one receives, and it whets one's appetite for wanting to taste more. At times, one feels an insatiable hunger that is never satiated, and one would want to be always with the mouth open to receive this celestial nourishment. So my mind was crowded with many things that regarded the divine will, so much so that if I wanted to write everything, I don't know where I would go to get the paper. Therefore I limit myself as much as I can. And since some doubts were crawling within my mind, my celestial teacher, Jesus, visiting his little newborn, told me, "Blessed daughter, it is then that an act has more value, when one knows the good that is inside. And the more one knows, the more one acquires, because the creature does that act based on the value that she knows. And our paternal goodness cannot deceive, nor make fun of anyone. If we make known that there is that value in that act. It is because we want to give the value manifested by us. And the sure sign is the very knowledge which of its own already possesses that value. We act like a king who takes a paper that has no value and puts on it now 100, now 1,000, now 1,000,000. The paper has the same quality, the same shape, but according to the number, so it possesses its value. Therefore, what gives the value to the paper is the number and the image of the king, who makes use of it as the currency of the kingdom. Now, so we do. The paper is the act of the creature. The knowledge is our divine image. The value is the number that we place on it. So, what is the wonder if we say that one act alone in our will surpasses in value all acts together of all other creatures done outside of it? It is our image that is coined in the human act, as if on paper, and the value of our knowledge that puts the number on it. Are we not entitled to put the number that we want on the paper of the human will? If the king is entitled to put the number he wants over a most wretched paper, more so are we to form the currency that must circulate in our azure fatherland. Moreover, our will was a free gift that we gave to man. He paid us nothing in order to have it, nor did he have sufficient moneys or means to be able to pay us, other than the most wretched paper of his human will, which, to his misfortune, he did not even want to lend to us, in order to keep our great gift. And besides, we were his most tender and most loving father. And between father and children, no accounts are kept, because it is known that the father must give to the children, and they are obliged by duty of justice to love and keep with esteem what the father gives them. Here, then, the necessity of the knowledges on the divine will, and we give them bit by bit, so that the creature may appreciate this gift so great, which we freely want to give her. Knowledge generates the appetite, the desire to know more, and the human will is disposed little by little to undergo the transformation, the unification of the divine will. And we, without keeping accounts, or paying attention to whether she can pay us or not, shall place our image and the incalculable number of a divine value, and will be content to see our children rich and happy of our own divine happiness and wealth. In addition to this, my most sweet one added, "My daughter, you must know that as the creature operates in our will, she receives the divine fecundity into her act, which forms the divine seed in all of her acts, such that, spreading in the entire soul, it forms the divine seed in the thought, in the word, in everything, in such a way that the sweet enchantment of her Creator can be seen in her little act. happy to give life to the act of the creature with his lovable presence. Oh, if the sweet surprise, the unheard of prodigy, could be seen by all, the Supreme Being enclosed in the small circle of the human act, they would remain so stupefied that the entire prodigy of the universe would be an absolute nothing compared to this. Therefore, there is a great difference between one who operates in my will and one who operates without it. The first one is a spring whose fount can boast of being inexhaustible in its water, and of being able to give water to whomever wants it, without ever drying up. The second is a fount that does not spring, and dries up. The first is fecund earth, and its meadows are always flowery. The second is sterile earth, that hardly produces a few wild plants. The first has the sun at her disposal, which makes her drink its large gulps of light, of sweetness, of sanctity, of invincible patience, of heroism, of sacrifices. The second has the night that gives her sips to maintain her passions, to debilitate her, and make her lose the sight of heaven. The difference between one and the other is great. Therefore be attentive, and let my divine will consume you and transform you completely into its light. Fiat. You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 31, Part 6. Fiat.